about ancient Greece. We're going to be talking this time about some of the wars that they fought in ancient Greece. We're going to be talking about one of the most famous figures, Alexander the Great, and we're also going to be talking about some of the gods and culture of ancient Greece as well. And as always, there's going to be some times where you can answer some questions that I pose to you all. So let's go ahead and get started. Of course, we're going to go through our procedures real quick, and that is to make sure we stay focused during the lesson. You want to make sure that you participate when you're asked. Use the chat for lesson purposes only. As always, make sure we are respectful to one another. You want to make sure that you do not leave the session early unless you absolutely have to. And you want to make sure that you follow the Microsoft Teams rules, which are turn off your camera and microphone. If you wish to speak, you can go ahead and click the raise hand button. And then when I call on you, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and speak. And then when you're done, you want to remute yourself and lower that hand button. And then most importantly, as always, make sure that we learn lots while we're here. I appreciate the turnout, guys. There's almost 20 of you here. That's great. So we're going to start off by looking at the learning goal. And in this case, we're going to look at, do you have the ability to analyze the ancient wars of Greece, identify the achievements of Alexander the Great, and describe the Greek gods in Greek culture. So right now you may only be at a 1, maybe a 2. Hopefully by the time you're done here, we're going to work our way up to a 3 or possibly even a 4. I will say this particular live lesson is long. It's got more slides than any of the other ones, but I'm going to try to get through it as fast as possible, because if you notice in this module, there's lots and lots of readings. So I had more stuff to cover. So we'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. The first section talks about Greek wars. There are 2 wars that the readings really talk about in ancient Greece. One of them, they both start with the letter P. One of them is the Persian War, and the other one is the Peloponnesian War. Now, the Persian War, that one is Greece fighting kind of unified against a neighboring enemy. The Peloponnesian War is when the Greeks fight amongst each other. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So if you look here, it says the Persian War. It says it was fought between the various united Greek city-states and their neighbor, the Persian Empire. In this case, Sparta and Athens work together. They're on the same side. Many city-states remained neutral. So on this map that you see here, if it's an orange, that's the neighboring Persian Empire. Anything in blue, that's the city-states of Greece that were united fighting against the Persian Empire. If you see yellow, that means that that's an area of Egypt that's controlled by the Persians. And then in gray there, those are the different city-states that were neutral or didn't participate in the war. Okay. So the causes of the Persian War, you'll see to the far east of Greece, there's an empire. To the far east of Greece, I'm sorry, let me think again. In the far east of Persia, there's Greece, right, where we've been talking about. So you can see the arrow is pointed to it on that map. But everything you see outlined in red and in that reddish pink color, that's the Persian Empire at the time. So you can see that it's a really large piece of land. And really the Persians had their eye on Greece because of all the islands, and they knew that it would be a really good place for trading. So they really wanted to kind of take over that land and use it for trade and increase their own wealth. The war begins when King Darius I invades and occupies a small part of Greece that borders the Persian Empire. And it starts off this war that's going to last for 20 years. So the Greeks living in the East did not like living under the Persian king's rule. So they started to rebel. And when they did, some of the other city-states kind of came to their aid, most notably Athens and Sparta, both. Athens built up their navy at the request of their leader at the time. Athens, you're going to see, always has the superior navy, whereas Sparta's better in their army on land. Athens has a superior navy. The Athenian ships were smaller and faster than the Persian ships, and this allowed them to kind of successfully fight off the Persians. King Darius the First was angered at this, didn't like the fact that he was kind of outgunned and outsmarted by these Greeks, and he vowed revenge. He said, someday I'm going to come back and get my revenge and take over Greece. So phase 2 of the war begins years later when Persia invades the Greek peninsula. Okay, so they decide again that they're going to try to invade and take over Greece. The first battle of phase 2 is at this place called Marathon, and it's 26 miles east of Athens. So the Athenians were victorious, right? Even though they weren't supposed to win and the Persians had a much larger force, the Greeks were still able to actually defeat the Persians. This proved to the other Greek city-states that they had a chance at winning, and it really encouraged more people to come and join the cause. When the battle was over, the Athenians were so excited that the Greeks had won that they sent a messenger and told him to run as fast as you can back to Athens and tell them that we have won. So this man runs 26 miles back to Athens from Marathon, which is why now today we have marathons and they're 26 miles long. It's kind of a throwback to this battle, right? When a guy ran 26 miles home to tell them they won the battle. So back to the war. Darius the First recalls his forces after the Battle of Marathon and vows to rebuild the army. He does later die and never gets a chance to relaunch the invasion. But there is another invasion, this time by another Persian whose name is Xerxes. So 10 years after this Battle of Marathon, the Xerxes and the Persians invade again. And this time, the Greeks decided that along with Sparta and their strong army, they were going to unite all these city-states into something that's called the Peloponnesian League. So really you have all these city-states now really working together to try to fight off these Persians. So the deal was that the Athenians would kind of fight in the sea with their navy, and the Spartans would really lead the fight on land with their army. Xerxes, though, ends up taking kind of a secret mountain passageway into the Greek peninsula, and the Spartans and the Athenians try to stop them, but by the time they realize where they are and how they're coming into Athens, it's too late. The Spartans were greatly outnumbered, and even though they fought hard, they still eventually lose to the Persians. And the Persian army reaches the city of Athens, and its citizens fled. The Persians actually burned down the entire city of Athens. So the end of the war comes, even though Athens is burnt down, the Greeks are still fighting, right? Are still strong, and they prove this at the Battle of Salamis, and that's the final battle of this war, and it really is the battle that determines the outcome of the entire war. So what happens is the Athenian ships come right up close to the Persian ships. I mean, they sail so that they're right nearby, and they take burning planks or burning pieces of wood and throw them over to the neighboring ships so that their ships would catch fire. So what ends up happening is the Persians on their ships, right, when they catch fire, they have no place to go, so they jump overboard and they swim to shore. And when they get to the shore, the Spartan army is there waiting to attack them. So they have a choice to either drown on a sinking ship or to jump and swim to shore where the Spartans will be there waiting for them. So this was a brilliant plan by the Greeks, and it caused them to win the Battle of Salamis, and it actually caused Xerxes and the other Persians to flee back to their empire and never to invade Greece again. So Greece wins the Persian War in the long run. They're the winners. Another fun story about this war is the tale of Pythia. Now, she was a Greek priestess. And back then, priestesses were sought out when they needed some kind of prophecy or some kind of advice. And her advice in particular was rarely questioned. She was supposed to be one of the more all-seeing of the priestesses. So right before the Battle of Salamis that we just talked about, where they threw the wooden planks onto the ships, they went to her and she said that the Greeks will be safe within their wooden walls. And people didn't really know what that meant. Some people thought that, the wooden walls meant the walls built around the city of Athens and that they should just stay home and they'll be safe if they stay home. Other people thought that wooden walls meant their wooden ships. So people pushed for the Navy to attack. And luckily, the people, they did push the Navy to attack, and that battle was a success for them, and those people turned out to be right. So now we're going to switch gears, and we're going to move from the Persian War to the other P war, right? The Peloponnesian War. And like I said, that's the one that instead of it being fought unified Greeks against a neighboring empire, this time it's fought Greek city-states among themselves. So let's take a look at what happens here. So after this war, after the Persian War, the Greeks realized that they have to be unified if they want to fight off future attacks, right? They are strong if they are unified. So they know that if they work together, it'll always be easier. So they decided to create a league or a kind of an alliance for that purpose, and they called it the Delian League. Money was collected to pay for this protection. The money was used to train men, build ships, and make better weapons. The league was made up of Sparta, Athens, and a lot of the other surrounding city-states, some of the most influential ones. Athens was the city-state that was kind of in charge of it, and they're the ones that collected the money and kept the alliance safe. So it soon became clear that Athens was kind of benefiting the most from this league, and that they were getting richer and stronger and more powerful since they were the ones that held all the money. So the people of Athens started then moving out to the other city-states and kind of expanding their territory. And a lot of these other city-states didn't really like that. And all of a sudden, instead of Athens being, a partner, they became kind of an aggressor. So Sparta encourages a lot of these other city-states to kind of join together and rise up against Athens and fight them. And that is what leads to the Peloponnesian War. So if you look at this map, if it's in purple, that tells us that they are either the city of Athens or people that were allied with the city of Athens. And if it's in green, that tells us that they are Sparta and the places allied with Sparta. If it's in yellow, that means that they're part of Greece and they're not involved in the war. And if it's gray, that means they're just outside of Greece altogether. So it's really the green areas versus the purple areas. So the Peloponnesian War begins, right? Athens versus Sparta. And Pericles is the top general in Athens, as well as the influential politician. We talked about him a little bit last week. He wanted to avoid fighting the Spartan army on land. So instead, he tried to push and get the war fought at sea with the Navy, because that's where Athens is more powerful. So Pericles encouraged Athens to build a fortress or a wall around its city to protect itself from the Spartan land army. So that's exactly what they did. They built this big wall around their entire city. Citizens who lived outside of the city then kind of flocked and moved inside the city walls for protection against the Spartans. So the city was not really prepared for this, and it kind of led to overcrowding. And with that overcrowding, there becomes, a shortage of food and clean water. So there was starvation happening in the city of Athens. And of course, where there are lots of people, there's human waste. And where there's lots of human waste, there's germs and disease. And soon a plague struck the city, right? Disease spread through the city. Within 2 years, 1/3 of Athens' population had died, including Pericles himself. The disease weakened the people, it diminished the population, and it took the lives of some of Athens' greatest leaders. The Spartans were able to outlast the Athenians, who were held captive within their own walls. Thus, the Spartans won the Peloponnesian War. Now, they won in terms of they were able to defeat Athens. They did not win in terms of kind of emerging from this war as being, a strong, powerful city-state controlling the other ones. Okay, so yes, they won, but they also kind of didn't win. It's a little complicated. The Peloponnesian War lasts for 27 years. It's a very long time. The war ends with the 421 or the 421 truce. There's no real winner of this war, like I said, because there's such an enormous loss of life on both sides, both from fighting and from disease. Crops and wealth were destroyed. Cities and homes were demolished. Perhaps the worst outcome of the war and the most significant outcome of this war is that Greece itself becomes weaker. Many Greeks lost hope and faith in the ideas that had once made them great. Okay, so by fighting amongst themselves, they really kind of ended up ultimately hurting themselves. Okay, so that concludes our portion on Greek wars. So we're going to go ahead and ask some questions. Remember, click that raise hand button if you think you know the answer and you want to answer them. So the first question is, how was the Greek Navy able to defeat the Persian army in the Persian War? How was the Greek Navy able to defeat the Persian army? Was it Greece had superior generals? Greece had smaller, quicker ships? Persian sailors were mainly slaves? The Greek gods had received enough human sacrifices. Let's start with Ella. What do we think?
B.
B. Greece had smaller, quicker ships. Good job, guys. I love all the participation. I see tons of hands up. Great job. Okay, which marked the end of the Peloponnesian War? The Athenian army was beating the Spartan army, both sides agreeing to become separate countries, the 4-2-1 truce, or the death of King Darius? Let's see. Luis, what do you think?
A.
A. A is not really the answer, because if anything, you would argue that the Spartans probably won and not the Athenians. Rhea, what do you think?
The 4-2-1 truce.
Good. C, the 4-2-1 truce. Good job. Which of the following factors led Greek communities to build both an army and a navy? So this question is going to kind of be a little tricky, so you got to maybe think about it for a second. So what factor, which one of these things led to them creating both armies and navies, meaning fighting on land and fighting on water? Their location on a peninsula, their access to many rivers, their access to mountains, their location near the Middle East. Let's see. Anya, what do you think?
A.
A, good. So if they're on a peninsula, right, that means that it's land surrounded on three sides by water. So we know that they had land and that they had lots of water nearby. So because of that, they would have had both an army and a navy. Good job. So which of the following was the origin of today's marathons? Remember we talked about those marathons, those long runs. The announcement of the Athenian defeat at the Battle of Marathon, the announcement of the Athenian victory at the Battle of Marathon, the announcement of the defeat of the Persians at Mount Marathon, the announcement of the victory of the Persians at Mount Marathon. Let's see. Luke, what do we think?
B.
B. Good. So that's when the Athenians or Athens wins, and then they want to proclaim the news. So they run 26 miles to tell the people. The priestess, PYTHIA, foretold the Greeks how the wooden walls would keep them safe. It is believed that the wooden walls referred to what? In the end, right, the wooden walls refer to what? The fortress walls, the navy, the homes of Greek people, the forests of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Let's see. Dylan, what do we think?
I think it's the Navy.
The navy. I agree. Those ships, right? That's what kept them safe. Good. And how did Pericles die? That leader of Athens, at the hands of the Spartan army, at the hands of the Spartan navy, at the hands of the Persian army, or during the Athenian plague? Mackenzie Lynn, what do you think?
D.
D, during the plague. Good job. You guys cruised right through that. Great job. I appreciate, guys, all the hands up. There's a lot of you here today, which is wonderful. So if I didn't get to you this time, hopefully I'll get to you in one of the other times too. Okay, I'm doing my best to try to make sure I get to everyone. All right, but thank you so much for raising your hand and great job answering those questions. All right, Alexander the Great. This is the second of three parts of this live lesson, and I think Alexander the Great is really kind of a fascinating character here. So Alexander was born a prince, son of King Philip II. King Philip II was a great and respected king of Macedonia, and Philip II actually kind of develops a new way of fighting. and it's called cavalry. So he decides that he's going to take his troops and put them on horseback. So cavalry means kind of soldiers riding horses. And he's going to use that technique to kind of invade neighboring Greece. And it is really successful. So Alexander's father is able, using soldiers on horseback, to conquer all of Greece. And King Philip II is the leader of all of Greece when he's assassinated. And when he's assassinated, right, obviously he's killed, and his son Alexander becomes the ruler of all of Greece. Okay. Right away, growing up, he kind of doesn't like the Persians nearby, and he always kind of had his eye on the Persian Empire. Mackenzie, do you have a question, or just forget to put your hand down? Okay, we'll keep going. So shortly after he comes into power, Thebes, one of the city-states, revolts, and Alexander uses this cavalry, just like his father did, to go in and crush that rebellion and keep control of Greece. Then he moves into the area of Persia, right? He does not like the Persians, and he wants to kind of conquer as much of it as he can. So the Persian army outnumbers Alexander's army by 35,000 people. So they have the much larger army. But Alexander is confident, and he ended up winning, taking the western part of the Persian Empire. It's kind of the area that we call Asia Minor, which is where Turkey is today. So the Persian Empire is huge, and he ends up first taking over kind of the far western part of that empire, okay, using his cavalry and his soldiers. So the Greeks made their way through, like you said, Persia and Asia Minor, and then they head south to Egypt, right? They want to take over the region of Egypt as well. The Egyptians realize that they're no match for these Greeks, right? They know what they can do on these horses, and so instead of fighting, they just throw down their weapons and they welcome Alexander. No blood is really shed here. It's much more of a we know we're going to lose, so we're just going to accept the fact that you're here to take us over. After Egypt, they kind of continued east and kind of attacked what was then known as Mesopotamia. The Persians had spent the winter hoping to rebuild their army and get stronger to resist Alexander, but they still lose this major battle, and the Greeks are able to take control of Babylon and even later the Persian capital. So Alexander kind of really swiftly takes over the entire Persian Empire, which if you look at this map here, shows a really large region, big area. So by this time, his soldiers were tired. They kind of want to go home. They say, great, we've taken over much of the known world. Let's just go home. But Alexander was not done. He said, no, I've heard that there's another empire, right, further to the east called the Indus River Valley, and I want to take that over too. And so he does. So they actually stretch even further into the Indus River Valley and conquer that empire as well. So when you think about it, guys, besides Module 3, where we kind of shifted over to North and South America, right? If you think about all the civilizations that we've talked about so far, it was Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus River Valley, the Greeks, and Alexander the Great really takes over all of them. He really kind of conquers what is essentially at the time the entire known world. So he's very, very impressive at conquering other places and using his military skill to really have no losses. He does it all without ever really even losing a battle. So very, very, very impressive. So Alexander dies shortly after taking over the Indus River Valley. There's some rumor that he was poisoned. Some people say he just got sick. We don't really know 100%. So that's kind of one of those mysteries type thing. But we do know that the empire that he created lasts after his death for over 300 years. So for a long time, this new really large Greek empire is in power and control. And we call this period of time the Hellenistic period, which really means like the era where people speak Greek, right? Or act like they're Greek. So in order to keep kind of charge or control of such a large area or people, he did two things. One, he kind of left Greeks behind at each of the cities that he conquered to kind of rule the city. So once his army would move in, take it over, he'd leave a group of people behind that were Greek and move on to the next city. And then those people who were in charge would get other Greeks to come and move into their cities. So essentially in every one of these cities that he conquered, Greek citizens were moving into that area, which helped the Greeks maintain control for such a long time in such a large area. So when the Greek ruled all these cities, it really spread their culture to all these areas of the world and really influenced them, especially their written language, kind of their plays and customs, and a lot of their knowledge and scientific discoveries. One city in particular, named Alexandria, which is in modern day Egypt, becomes kind of the largest city of the empire and is really the empire's kind of biggest example of what it was like to live in the Hellenistic age. And like I said, it's named after Alexander the Great himself, Alexandria. So the city of Alexandria is known for the fact that it was a planned city. They planned it out. So it had really wide streets and lots of public parks. It became the center of learning in the Hellenistic age, and that's because it had a world-famous library that held copies of all the great Greek literature, a lot of their math and science discoveries, right? So it's really the center of their knowledge. Unfortunately, though, the library burned down, and a lot of these great works of literature and scientific discovery are kind of lost forever. But a lot of it actually does survive. There's multiple copies of certain things, and they're able to save some of it, but a lot of it's destroyed when the Library of Alexandria burns down. It also should be noted that Alexandria had a pretty impressive lighthouse. It's a really grand lighthouse. It was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, but I think either in the 14th destroyed by an earthquake. So it's not there anymore, sadly. But it was very impressive at the time. And then the last slide for this section on Alexander the Great is his empire had lots of kind of advances. And Archimedes was the one who figured out a way to kind of raise water through pipes. And that really helped when it came to watering crops. Today we use kind of the same technology, right, to get water upstairs into your house, right? Why does your second floor, when you turn on the faucet, how do they get the water up there, right? Through these pipes. And even, in skyscrapers in New York City, you've got, 100-story skyscrapers. How do they get the water up there? Well, that's by using these pipes and the system of pressure. This is also the time period where geometry is born, the study of math that I'm sure all of you are very excited about taking, known as geometry. And then astronomers also make big advances in this time. This is the time where they actually figure out how big the Earth is. They kind of figure out how many miles around it is. They also kind of figure out that the Earth is rotating, right? And that the Earth is not the center of the universe. It was widely believed that the Earth was kind of the center of everything, and everything spun around us. All right. Quiz number 2. This one on Alexander the Great. We have hands up already. Luke, is that a question, or are you just preemptively answering the question? Okay. All right. Let's see how we do. What tactic did Philip and later his son Alexander use to conquer all of ancient Greece? Did they use artillery, which is like cannons and tanks, cavalry, which is soldiers on horsebacks, ambushes, which is like sneak attacks, or just plain old luck? Which one did they use? Let's see. Juan, what do you think?
B.
B. I agree. Good job. How did the ancient Egyptians react to Alexander's invasion? They recruited Phoenicians and Persians to fight with them. They burned everything to the ground to make the region unappealing for Alexander and his army. They gave up without a fight because they knew that their own military was weaker. They fought hard and caused Alexander to suffer his one and only defeat. Which one is that, Adam?
C.
C. They knew they were going to lose, so they just gave up. No shame in that. After conquering all of Persia, Alexander the Great conquered one last empire. What was that last empire that he conquered? Egypt, Rome, Mesopotamia, or the Indus River Valley? Marcus, have I called on you yet? Marcus, we'll go with you. What do you think?
D.
D. There we go. The Indus River Valley. Good job. How did Alexander and subsequent rulers keep control of such a large empire? How did they keep control of it when it was so big? Sadikio, what do you think?
B.
B.
And
Leaders were from Greece and encouraged Greeks to move to these conquered areas. Good. Greek leaders encouraged more Greeks to move. All right. Which is not true of the city of Alexandria? So 3 of these are true and one of them's not. Which one's not true? It had a large walled fort with temples. It had a large lighthouse. It had a large library housing all the world's knowledge. It had large, wide streets with public parks. Which one did we not mention? Let's see. Who have I not called? I think I've called on everyone that I see frequently. Juan, what do you think?
D.
So it actually does have the large, wide streets and public parks. But that's a good guess. Let's see. Rhea, what do you think?
A.
A. So whereas they probably did have a fort somewhere in there, right? But it's not known for its walled fort with its particular temples, right? But it is known for the lighthouse, the library, and the wide street and public parks. Good. Which of the following is not an achievement of the Hellenistic era? Water moving through pipes, figuring out that the earth rotates, discovering that lightning contains electricity, or the birth of geometry. So which one is not something that comes from this era? Evelyn, what do you think? You there, Evelyn?
C.
C. Good. That discovery comes much later. All right. Once again, guys, thank you so much for your participation. I appreciate it. Lots of hands up and lots of kids here. It makes me very happy. All right. So let's very quickly talk about your assignment. So some of you may have even already done this, but assignment 4.05 talks about Alexander the Great and his empire. So it's a series of 4 maps, right? So it says to print it. If you don't have a printer, that's fine. You can just look at it. Print the document. And then there are questions that you have to answer that go along with each map. There's also 2 follow-up questions at the end. I have had very few kids have issues with this one. A lot of the kids are able to kind of figure this one out pretty easily, and I haven't really had many questions on this one, or have had many kids have had to send it back to many kids. So that's a good thing. But obviously, if you have any questions, you can always feel free to ask me. You're basically just answering the 8 questions about these 4 different maps, okay? And it's about the growth of his empire, all right? All right, so let's move on to the last section of today's lesson, and that's the Greek gods and culture. Guys, if you have your hands up, I assume you have a question. So if you don't have a question, go ahead and put your hands down. If you do, keep them up, and I'll go ahead and call on you real quick. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to suggest that people who already went, like me, or other people, should bring their hands down for the rest of it unless they have a question.
We could do that, but that's not a bad idea. I could look into doing that in some of the future ones, but I want to always encourage kids to raise their hand as much as possible. But that's not a bad idea. Okay, so for the Greeks, the Greek god and cultures, like I said, Greek gods in particular are a popular subject for kids. A lot of kids really like talking about the Greek gods. So hopefully you guys are ready for this one. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of different Greek gods here. The readings only talk about just a couple of them, so we don't go into too much detail. We kind of just skim the surface of the Greek gods. Let's see, Mackenzie, do you have a question?
I actually have a comment. I'm trying to read all of the Percy Jackson series and all of them from that author, and that's how I started like wanting to learn more about Greece and Greek gods.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the I've actually never read those books. I may add them to my reading list, but I think a lot of the kids who are excited about the Greek gods, their excitement comes from those books. So that's good. Luke, do you have a question?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, but whenever I log on to wait, am I muted still? Wait, am I
No, I can hear you.
Okay. Whenever I log on to Microsoft Teams, using a web browser instead of the app, sometimes it doesn't allow me to like unmute, and if I am unmuted and my microphone's unmuted, it won't let me talk. So I think that's an error for some of the times when you may call on a person and then they don't respond.
Yeah, there's always issues with it. I understand that, but awesome. Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue so that we don't take too much time. If you guys have more questions, I'll get to it in a little bit. Okay, but I want to make sure that we respect everyone's time. So we're going to start, like I said, with the Greek gods. And like I said, remember, we don't get too much involved in the Greek gods. We kind of just skim the surface a little bit with them. But hopefully I'll, bring up some of the points that you're interested or excited about. So the Greeks were polytheistic, right? Meaning they had many gods, and they had lots of myths about their gods and lots of interesting kind of origin stories about their gods. Many of these myths serve as kind of an explanation for things they didn't know how to explain. The Greeks believed that each of their gods had different powers and a unique personality. So different aspects of life would be related to a specific god. So Zeus is the big one. He's the king of the gods, right? I tried to find the most dramatic pictures of the gods I could find to kind of pique interest here. But he's the king of the gods. He's the god over law, power, and rule. He kind of was the god who rewarded good and punished evil. And the thunderbolt was kind of his famous weapon. Hera is actually his wife, and she's the queen of the gods, and actually also his sister, which by our standards is a little weird. But she protected women and punished misbehaving husbands. And partly that was because Zeus was not the best husband. And she often fought with Zeus, who was unfaithful to her. Apollo, he's one of the most important gods, and he was known for his care of flocks and herds. He was connected with prophecy, the god of medicine, music, poetry, and even archery. Okay, so one of the most important gods was Apollo. Athena is the goddess of war and the goddess of wisdom, and she's the female counterpart to Ares. Ares we'll talk about in just a minute. She was Zeus's favorite daughter. She wasn't born. Instead, she kind of sprang from Zeus's head. It's a little strange, but that's what their myths told them. Athena is the god that the city of Athens is named after. Was kind of Athens' patron god. Ares is the god of war also, but the male god of war. And he's the son of Zeus and Hera. He was a fierce fighter who often got involved with fights with humans. Hermes is the messenger of the gods. He's the god of athletics, and he's the god that protected travelers and merchants. He was able to freely move between the worlds of the living and the gods due to his winged sandals. And then you have Aphrodite. She's the goddess of beauty and the goddess of love, and she's also considered to be the goddess of motherhood. She was the mother of Adonis, who is regarded as the god of male beauty as well. Luke, do you have any questions? Okay. So when it comes to honoring the gods, the Greeks built temples to the gods. And they created festivals in honor of their gods. So the big famous temple is the Parthenon in Athens, and you'll see that's what it looked like then, and then what it looks like today. You can actually go visit the Parthenon. It's in Athens on the Acropolis. Feasts, plays, and sometimes even sacrifices were all given as ways to kind of honor the gods. The gods were blamed when positive things happened, and they were also blamed when negative things happened, right? So if there was a drought and there wasn't rain to grow crops, right, the gods would be blamed for that. If if they just won a great battle or a great war and they celebrated, the gods would be blamed for that as well. So good and bad, it was usually the fault of the gods. The Olympic Games is one of the major ways that they honored the gods in ancient Greece. So they held these kind of competitions in athletics, and the city of Olympia was the city-state that hosted these games, and the games were in honor of Zeus. And they were held every 4 years, and different city-states would kind of send athletes to Olympia to compete in these games. Today's Olympics are really modeled after the Greek Olympics, and really it's where the idea came from for different countries to send everyone to a single spot to compete in athletics. Another thing about the Greeks is they're philosophers. So there's 3 big Greek philosophers that are famous, and that's Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So Socrates was really big on getting people to learn based on using questions. So he taught using questions. He asked students a series of questions and then challenged them to kind of examine their answers from all sides. When he was 70 years old, he was sentenced to death for corrupting the minds of children, right? Which really what he was doing was educating them and expanding their thinking and getting them to think critically and more worldly. One of his students was Plato, and Plato, as an adult, kind of also becomes a great philosopher, a great thinker, and he founded a school where he taught the importance of being able to reason, right? To really be able to jump to, or to really be able to form conclusions. He wrote a book that was called The Republic, and it kind of describes in there his idea of a perfect government. And in his head, a perfect government is run by great thinkers or philosophers like himself. One of Plato's students was Aristotle, and Aristotle criticizes democracy and doesn't think that it's the best way to run a government. He says that it's best if a government is run by a single, strong, but moral man, and that he urged people to live in a golden mean, which means kind of living your life in moderation, not too much of things, not too little of things. Aristotle also sets up a school, and his most famous student is actually Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great is a child. Remember, he was a prince, so he had lots of privilege, and he was one of Aristotle's students. So Greek writings, the Greeks wrote a great deal, and a surprising amount of what they wrote is still available for us today. One of the best examples of Greek literature is the Iliad and the Odyssey, which is 2 stories that was written by a man named Homer. The Iliad and the Odyssey are very famous and very much a part of our culture today. If you've ever heard of the Trojan horse, right? The Trojan horse is a story from the Iliad. If you've ever seen the movie Troy, it's a little bit older now, but it has Brad Pitt in it. I'm trying to think who else is in it. But that's a movie that basically centers around the stories of the Iliad. The Odyssey is kind of a sequel of sorts to that book. It's about a guy who returns home from the war in the Iliad but gets lost at sea and kind of spends years trying to get home. And in the process of getting home, travels to all these different islands and encounters all these kind of crazy things. 2 very good stories I would highly suggest. But the Greeks are also known for writing dramas. Greek plays were usually performed outdoors in great outdoor theaters, and they're usually based on some kind of familiar stories. They wrote either tragedies or comedies. Tragedies were usually sad and dramatic, whereas comedies were usually fun and made fun of people and had happy endings. So lots of different famous stories come out of these Greek plays. Antigone is one of them. Probably not something you'll read until late high school or college, if at all. But that's another kind of famous one. So Greek math and science. The Greeks were interested in science as a way to kind of organize the world. Lots of stuff that they didn't know about, and they wanted to be able to understand it and describe it. So they really looked to science and math to kind of find answers to things. The Pythagorean theorem comes out of this time period, right? He's one of those early founders of geometry, right? And that's the whole a squared equals b squared plus c squared, right? So if you are in geometry already, then good for you, that's great. If not, you'll be getting to this mathematic theory soon, okay? It's how you find the hypotenuse of a triangle. Thales was a Greek scientist, and he suggested that the natural events were controlled by science, that most people at the time thought that natural events were actually controlled by the gods. And he said, no, there's a reason why we have earthquakes, right? Not the gods, but because, and tried to answer these kind of questions based on science and not myth. He also was the first scientist to really kind of suggest that the earth was round, when lots of people at the time thought the earth was flat. The other big scientific, or not scientific, but the other big area that had advancements was medicine. Hippocrates was known as the father of medicine, and he kind of develops a set of medical ethics or rules. And today it's known as the Hippocratic Oath. And doctors take this oath before they can practice medicine. And it states that they will not do harm to any of their patients. All right, last little quiz here. Who's the king of the gods? Easy one. What do we think? Who's the king of the gods? Hermes, Hades, Ares, or Zeus? Dahlia, what do you think?
Zeus.
I agree. Good job. What is Apollo known for? Controlling the oceans and the Navy, controlling the underworld and the afterlife, controlling medicine, music, and animal herds, or being the messenger to the gods? Apollo, which one is he known for? Sophia, oh, did you go away? Okay, let's give it to Rhea. What do you think?
C.
I agree. Controlling medicine, music, and animal herds. When Greece was at war, which two gods did they look to? When Greece was at war, which two gods did they look to? Hermes and Zeus, Aphrodite and Apollo, Hera and Poseidon, Athena and Ares. Adam, what do you think?
D.
Athena and Ares. Good job. I would agree. Which of the following is not one of the ways that the Greeks honored their gods? They built temples, they mummified their dead, they held the Olympic Games, they performed plays. Which one is not one of the ways that they honored their gods? Anya, what do you think?
Mummified the dead.
I would agree. Good. Other cultures did that, but not the Greeks. Which of the following is not one of the ancient Greece philosophers? Socrates, Plato, Aphrodite, or Aristotle? Which one is not one of those Greek thinkers? Let's see. Luke, what do you think?
C.
C, Aphrodite. Good job. Which statement is true? So 3 of these are false. Which one is true? Greeks were known only for writing tragedies. Pythagorean was the father of medicine. Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, 2 famous stories. Thales was the first scientist to argue that the world was flat. Zacchael, what do you think? Sadiqa, what do you think? All right, let's see. Ella, what do you think?
D. Do I know? Not D. Not D.
I think I got 2 of you on, which is fine. What do you guys think? Go ahead, tell me. What do you think?
My screen is frozen, and
Okay.
either I can exit page because my page is unresponsive, or wait.
Okay, if you want, you can sign out and then sign right back in. I'll let you in.
Okay.
All right, Ella, what do you think about this one? Which one?
Is it B?
No, okay, guys, for this one, the answer is going to be C, right? So it's a little tricky because the Greeks were known for writing comedies and tragedies, so it's not A. Pythagorean was the guy who really worked in geometry, not the father of medicine. And then Thales was the one who argued that the Earth was probably round, not flat. So the Iliad and the Odyssey were both written by Homer. So that's the one we're looking for there. Okay. All right. Assignment check. Let's look at 4.06. 4.06 talks about how it says it's a Facebook template. It doesn't really look much like Facebook, but that's what they call it anyway. So what you need to do is you need to kind of come up with one example of the Greeks, right, and what they did for each of these five aspects, right? What contribution they had for each of these five aspects. So you have to come up with one thing about the religion, one thing about sports, one thing about literature, one thing about philosophy, and then one thing about science, math, and medicine. This should be pretty easy after doing the readings and after what we just discussed here. So what you want to do is you want to first include a title to identify the period and location of your Greek civilization. Most kids are just saying ancient Greece, 300 BC or whatever. I'm fine with that. You need to include one profile image showing an example of one of these Greek contributions. So you just got to find one picture about something from either the religion, the sports, the literature, philosophy, or math and science, right? Just find one thing and then go ahead and put a picture in there and make sure it has a caption. And then you're going to come up with 5 status updates. One for each of the different contributions to Greek societies. Okay, so that's what we're looking for here. Just one thing for each of the 5. And then finally, make sure that it's at least 3 sentences for each of the 5 things. 3 sentences minimum. Okay. I haven't had a ton of kids get to this point yet, although I'm getting more and more of them, but a lot of kids aren't quite here yet. Just make sure that when you do it, that you have that minimum 3 sentences and that you have one for each of the 5 things, and you guys will mostly be fine. Also, it's not on here, but make sure that when you get to 4.08, it's another sprite assignment because there's no test on Module 4. So it's another one of those 140-point projects, right? And it's just like you did for the river civilizations, right? It's the same thing, except this one, you're doing it for the ancient Greeks, okay? Make sure you're thorough and make sure you adequately describe some kind of Greek aspect for social, political, religious, intellectual, technological, and economic, right? So shouldn't be very difficult because there's a lot of information in these readings about ancient Greece. So the sprite assignment should be pretty easy when you get to 4.08. Okay, so any questions on this assignment? Mackenzie, do you have a question on the assignment? Luke, do you have a question on the assignment? All right. Lewis, question on the assignment?
No, but I have a black screen.
Okay, so once again, just sign out and sign back in, and hopefully that will fix it. Okay. Rhea, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. So like when we get to the project, like will it be before, like where we had to, like find pictures and write about it?
Yep, so it's the exact same. We do those sprite assignments a lot in this class, so it'll be the same thing like you did for 2.6.
Yeah, I remember doing it for Module 2.
Yep, it'll be just like that, only on the ancient Greeks.
Yeah, I remember doing it for the Egyptians.
Good. Okay, Sophia, question?
I don't actually have a question. Wait, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I don't actually have a question. I had a comment.
Okay.
But my mom told me that my name actually means wisdom in Greek.
Oh,
I
very
think.
good. It could. I don't know that. That's sure. That's awesome. Zedekiel, would you have a question again?
No.
Okay.
It's all fixed, but I had a comment about the lesson.
Okay.
So I needed to come. And then, it's that when we were at the Greek philosophers, there was one pattern. The famous Greek philosophers, there was one pattern I saw.
What was that?
Each of them learned from each other.
Yeah, each one then learned from the one that came before. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so let's keep moving on. We're almost done, and then I'll hang on for any questions at the end. Okay, but essentially, guys, that's it. So thank you guys so much for coming today. Hopefully, if you think back to that scale at the beginning of the lesson, hopefully now You're able to kind of talk about some of the Greek gods and culture. You're able to describe stuff about Alexander the Great. And hopefully you can tell me a little bit about those 2 big Greek wars, okay? And hopefully you're at least a 3, maybe even a 4 if you've really took this to heart. So remember, guys, everything for this class is due by December 18th, okay? You have to have everything done, including the final. So once you have submitted all of your work up to 4.08, just reach out to me and I will give you the password for the final exam once I see that you've done everything. And then you have to pass part 1 and 2 of the final exam, and then I will contact your parent and close you out for the semester. If you guys finish before December 18th, then you're done. You don't have to start again until after January when we get back from the break. So the sooner you get done, the more time you'll have without having to do any work in this class. So that's good. So get it.
You're cutting out.
Other than that, we're done. So you can go ahead and sign off if you have no other questions. If you have questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes and go ahead and answer them. But thank you guys so much for coming.